listen carefully. Clubmen 1645, and today we're back in Dorset and we're in Sherborne, because we want to talk about the Committee of Array and the militia, who in March 1642 broke the Articles of Neutrality, and hence the start of the English Civil War as such, because the ordinance of militia by the Parliament, they formed their own armies back in 1642 as an answer to the Committee of Array, which were forming the armies for the Royalist effort. This garrison was set up in Sherborne, and it was going into the county of Dorset and pillaging and plundering. And that's why we've come here today, because we want to talk about what activity was in Sherborne later on in 1645. But we're here today and starting today in front of this lovely mural.
Yeah, it's fantastic.
It is, and it was done by the Sherborne community.
That's right, yeah. Yeah,
back in 2015.
2015, yes.
So,
yeah.
And it depicts Charles II there. Yep. Being put back on the throne, I suppose, and the fighting scenes in the street in Sherborne, which I believe was down, I don't know the streets of Sherborne, I think it was Cheap Street, I could be wrong, but there's obviously fighting between Royalists and parliamentarians in that scene. Can you see it?
I can, yes.
So
yes.
Let's wander around Sherborne and talk a little bit about the clubmen in the area. Right, this is Cheap Street, and this is where the fighting between the parliamentarian troops and the Cavaliers took place back in the Civil War. But we're not here to talk about them, we're here to talk about the clubmen, and I want to talk about the early days in May of 1645 when the clubmen got together at a rendezvous near Blandford to talk about Lewis Dives and the garrison here with the Royalists, and where they were fed up with the plundering in the county. And if we go round to the Abbey, we'll carry on with that story.
That's right.
Yeah. So there's reports in several parliamentary papers about what they were trying to do against both sides, because they didn't like either side in the Civil War. So I'm just reading out the parliamentary reports of the day.
That's fascinating.
Well, yeah, it is actually. Yeah. Well, as we were down Cheap Street, as I mentioned, back in May, there's a great rendezvous of clubmen near Blandford, but I want to go back to March, because in the Protestant Mercury, a parliamentarian paper report back on the 21st of March 1645, it says thus: upon the difference between Sir Lewis Dives and Colonel Goring, it is certified that there is another governor of Sherborne Castle, and it's also certified that the clubmen in Dorset have taken one of his colours and 40 horses with furniture, and with furniture they mean riding tackle as such, yeah? And it was given them great courage, and they resolved to die than suffer those atrocities and outrages brought to them by Colonel Goring's forces. So Lewis Dives and Colonel Goring had fallen out, and the clubmen had taken it upon themselves to settle the score with Goring, because obviously Goring was notorious plunderer, and in Godmanstone, that was his troops there earlier on, which the clubmen tackled when they were plundering there. So that is back in March 1645, and then we move to May, because when we move to May 16th, we also have a report, and it says thus: that the clubmen in Dorsetshire have a rendezvous between Shaftesbury and Blandford, that's what I mentioned, on Cheap Street, being about 3,000 who acquainted Sir Lewis Dives that they would pay no more contributions to the King's forces, and they threatened to join Colonel Graves and Colonel Welder in the west. So they were parliamentarian forces in the west, and they were down in Cornwall and Devon. But it's interesting about they didn't stand for either side this early on, because it's always said that the Dorset clubmen were proxy royalists, but they weren't in the early days. I mean, it was a necessity near the end of the Civil War where they did this, but in the early days they fell out with both sides. And I'll speak a bit more about May the 29th, because there's a really interesting letter in May the 29th where they didn't want either garrisons in the county at all, but we'll film that with another backdrop somewhere nice somewhere else. Here we are in front of the conduit, and we've moved away from the Abbey with the letter of the 16th, and I want to read out the letter of May 29th, 1645, and it says thus: "It was the same day certified of the West that there was a great party of clubmen again rising in Dorsetshire, and their intention of their rising, amongst others, is that they will not admit up and any inland garrison in that county. It was reported that they had sent to Lewis Dives to require him to demolish his garrison at Sherborne, or else they would bear him out of it," which I'll imagine is push him out of it, where it was said that Sir Lewis Dives gratified them and agreed to these terms, but obviously he didn't, because he was obviously still in the castle when Fairfax arrived later on in August. But that letter was also sent to the garrison of parliamentarian troops in Wareham, so they wanted both parties out of the county, royalists and parliamentarians. And that's what I want to say about May. And up to May they didn't want either side in the party, in the garrisons in Dorset. But while we're in Sherborne, obviously we will talk about the clubmen that were arrested in Shaftesbury at the time, because we all know that Fairfax sent Fleetwood to Shaftesbury to get the clubmen there in August the 3rd, and by August the 4th we know what happened on Hambledon Hill, don't we?
We do.
And those prisoners that were taken there were brought back to here in Sherborne, so it's a full circle of events with the clubmen in this area. So there you go, in Sherborne in 1645, and the clubmen in the county of Dorset. Sherborne, I want to read you my favourite character from Sherborne, which is a notorious guy called Captain Chimney Sweeper. And Captain Chimney Sweeper is reported obviously in a royalist newspaper of the day, because it's very derogatory to the parliamentarians, and it says that: "Now if you would know what creatures these are which now master plunderers and barbarious to ladies, you may have it from the mouth of one Captain Chimney Sweeper, commonly called Captain Dow of Sherborne in Dorsetshire, and since he was able to go, was ever notorious for thieving and villainy, till a few years since they betook himself to sweeping chimneys, whereby people conceived he might cheat the hangman. Now, this Dow is now a captain for the rebels at Westminster, whereby he is enabled to pillage and rob all honest men's houses, and if any ask him with what face he can rob them, he says he bids them forget what he was and remember what he is now, and who employ him." It's quite hard to read this, there's no punctuation in it, but there you go, my favourite character from Sherborne, the notorious Captain Chimney Sweeper. Welcome to Clubmen 1642, and today we're back...
1645.
1645. It was put here by the Southbourne Community School,
Or
wasn't
the
it?
Sherborne Community School.
What did I say?
Southbourne.
Oh, let's do it again. Coming to Sherborne today in front of this lovely mural, which was put here by in 20...
It's a mural.
It's a mural, back in 2015. And it caused... Is that my pages? No. What is that?
Come out your foot.
Alright, we'll do it again. We'll get it right in a minute, Sheila. Don't worry.